How to ignore people and feel good. Stoicism. Secrets to mental strength and self-control. How many times has your peace been disturbed by someone who is not even thinking about you right now? Pause for a moment and look back at your own days. A comment from a coworker echoes in your mind long after the conversation has ended. A message receives no reply, and suddenly your thoughts begin to race. A brief look from someone across the room feels loaded with meaning, and before you notice it, your mood has already changed. It is a strange phenomenon. Entire hours of your life can be shaped by something so small, so brief, and often so unclear. Yet the emotional weight feels real. The discomfort is real. The tension in your chest is real. But here is the question very few people dare to ask. What truly caused the disturbance? Was it the event itself? Or was it the authority your mind granted to that event? Most people move through life believing their peace depends on how others behave toward them. If others approve, they feel secure. If others criticize, they feel wounded. If others misunderstand them, they feel restless and defensive. Without noticing it, they hand the control of their inner state to people who may barely know them. This is one of the quiet tragedies of modern life. People wake up each morning with their emotional stability already placed in the hands of strangers, colleagues, family members, and sometimes even people on the internet whom they will never meet. A look of disapproval can disturb them. A careless remark can linger in their thoughts all day. Silence from someone they expected attention from can create anxiety that follows them into the night, and yet the person who caused all this internal movement may have already forgotten the moment entirely. This is the invisible imbalance most people live with. Your peace becomes fragile because it depends on forces outside your control. Centuries ago, the Stoics recognized this pattern with remarkable clarity. The philosopher Epictetus taught that human beings are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the judgments they attach to those events. In Enchiridion of Epictetus, paragraph 5, he reminds us that what harms us is not what happens, but the meaning we decide to give it. Think about how radical this idea truly is. It suggests that much of what we call emotional pain is not imposed on us by the world, but constructed within the mind. The world presents events, the mind interprets them, and that interpretation becomes the source of either calm or turmoil. Consider how easily the mind begins building stories. Someone speaks with a tone you did not expect. Instantly the mind asks questions. Did they mean something by that? Are they upset with me? Did I say something wrong? Within seconds, the imagination begins filling the empty space with possibilities. Most of them negative, most of them uncertain. Soon you are no longer reacting to what actually happened. You are reacting to the meaning you have created around it. This is where emotional chains are quietly forged, not in the event itself, but in the interpretation that follows. And the more attention we give to these interpretations, the stronger the chains become. We replay the moment. We analyze it from every angle. We attempt to read the minds of others as if their thoughts were written somewhere we could access. But they are not. What we end up confronting is not reality, but the reflection of our own fears. That is why two people can experience the same criticism and walk away with entirely different emotional outcomes. One person hears the words and continues with their day. The other carries the weight of those words for weeks. The difference was never the criticism itself. The difference was the authority granted to it. Marcus Aurelius expressed this idea with powerful simplicity in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 47. He wrote that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Read that again slowly. You have the power to revoke it. This realization changes everything. It means that the disturbance you feel when someone criticizes you, ignores you, misunderstands you, or judges you, is not an unavoidable condition of life. It is the result of a mental habit that can be examined and gradually transformed. The Stoics did not promise a world without criticism or misunderstanding. They understood human nature too well to believe such a world could exist. People will speak carelessly. They will misunderstand your intentions. They will project their own frustrations onto you. Sometimes they will judge you without knowing your story. That part of life cannot be controlled, but something else can. Your response, the place where their opinions meet your mind. That is where the true battle is fought. Most people spend their lives trying to control what others think about them. They try to appear flawless, agreeable, impressive, or unassailable. Yet this pursuit never truly brings peace because it depends on something unstable. Other people's thoughts. The Stoic path begins with a completely different question. What if your peace did not depend on their approval at all? What if the disturbance you feel is not proof of their power, but evidence of a habit that can be replaced? This is where the journey begins. Not by hardening the heart or becoming indifferent to humanity, but by reclaiming the authority that was unknowingly surrendered. Because once you see how easily the mind creates these invisible chains, another question inevitably appears. If the chains were created by the mind, could they also be removed by it? The answer begins with understanding a subtle but powerful force that shapes much of our emotional suffering. It is not always what people say about you. Very often, it is what you imagine they might be thinking. The tyranny of imagined judgment. Now that you have seen how easily your peace can be disturbed by the meaning your mind gives to events, we must look at something even more subtle, something that quietly shapes the emotional life of millions of people every day. Not the criticism that is spoken, the criticism that is imagined. Many of the battles that exhaust the mind never occur in the real world. They take place entirely in the private theater of thought. Someone walks past you without greeting you and your mind begins its quiet work. Did they ignore me on purpose? Are they upset with me? Did I say something wrong yesterday? Within seconds, an entire narrative begins to form. The mind becomes both the storyteller and the judge. It gathers fragments of memory, small details from past interactions, and arranges them into a story that feels convincing enough to trigger emotion. But notice what has happened. No accusation was spoken, no insult was delivered, no judgment was clearly expressed. Yet the body reacts as if a real threat has appeared. Your shoulders tighten, your mood shifts, your attention is pulled away from the present moment and dragged into a series of imagined explanations. The Stoics observed this mechanism long before modern psychology gave it a name. Epictetus warned his students about the danger of confusing impressions with reality. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 28, he explains that people are disturbed not by events themselves, but by the opinions they form about them. The mind receives an impression and immediately attempts to interpret it. But interpretation is not the same as truth. This distinction is small, yet its consequences are enormous. Consider how often the mind fills silence with suspicion. A delayed reply to a message becomes a sign of rejection. A short answer during a conversation becomes evidence of disapproval. A moment of distraction in someone's face becomes proof that they are secretly judging you. Each interpretation adds weight to the emotional experience. Soon you are no longer responding to what actually occurred. You are responding to a version of reality constructed inside your own thoughts. And because the story was created internally, it follows you everywhere. The conversation may have lasted only a minute, yet the mind can replay it for hours, each repetition strengthening the illusion that something significant has happened. This is the tyranny of imagined judgment. A person begins living under the authority of opinions that were never even expressed. Think about how much energy has been spent in your life defending yourself against possibilities that never became reality. Silent arguments rehearsed in your mind. Explanations prepared for accusations that were never made. Emotional discomfort created by interpretations that might be entirely incorrect. The mind becomes a factory of invisible adversaries, and the more attention you give these imagined judgments, the more convincing they become. This is why anxiety about other people's opinions often grows stronger in moments of uncertainty. When information is incomplete, the mind rushes to fill the gap. Unfortunately, it rarely fills that space with neutral interpretations. It fills it with fear. Fear of rejection, fear of humiliation, fear of being misunderstood. The Stoics understood that if a person allows every impression to dictate their emotional response, they will never experience stability. Life presents too many ambiguous moments for that strategy to work. Instead, They practiced a discipline that may feel unfamiliar at first. They paused. When an impression appeared, they did not immediately accept it as truth. They examined it. They asked whether the interpretation was justified or whether the mind had simply rushed to a conclusion. This pause created something powerful. Distance. Distance between the event and the emotion. Distance between the impression and the judgment. And in that distance, reason could begin its work. Ask yourself honestly, how many of the judgments you feared from others were never actually spoken? How many of the stories your mind created dissolved the moment you finally asked a simple question or received clarification? When examined carefully, imagined judgment often loses its authority. Not because the world becomes kinder overnight, but because the mind stops granting automatic belief to every interpretation it produces. Once you see this clearly, a quiet shift begins to take place. You start realizing that much of your emotional suffering was not imposed on you by other people. It was built slowly through assumptions that felt true simply because they were repeated. But there is a deeper layer still waiting to be uncovered. Even when criticism is real, even when judgment is spoken openly, something decisive still happens within you. A moment so subtle that most people never notice it. The moment when you decide whether their opinion will rule your inner world. The moment you hand over your authority. Imagine that someone criticizes you. The words are spoken clearly. Perhaps they question your decisions, your abilities, or the way you handled a situation. The sound reaches your ears, and for a brief moment, there is only information. A sentence has been spoken. Air has moved. Meaning has been expressed. At that instant, nothing has yet disturbed your peace. The disturbance appears a moment later. It appears when the mind begins to interpret what those words mean about you. This is the quiet moment most people never notice. The moment when a simple external event crosses the invisible boundary into your inner world. It is here, in this small and almost silent space, that authority is either kept or surrendered. Most people surrender it immediately. They hear criticism and instantly feel diminished. They hear disapproval and instantly feel threatened. They hear disagreement and interpret it as a verdict on their worth. But pause and observe this carefully. The words did not enter your mind with the power to define you. They arrived as sound and meaning. The power they now hold was granted after they were heard. This is why two people can receive the same criticism and experience completely different reactions. One person hears the words, reflects on whether there is truth in them, and moves forward calmly. The other person feels attacked, embarrassed, and restless long after the conversation has ended. The difference is not the criticism. The difference is the authority given to it. The Stoics understood that this moment of interpretation determines the stability of a person's life. Epictetus explained to his students that when someone insults you, the insult itself is not the injury. The injury appears only when you accept the judgment behind it. In Enchiridion of Epictetus, paragraph 20, he reminds us that if someone speaks badly of you, your first task is not to react with anger or defensiveness. Your task is to examine whether what they say is true. If it is true, correct yourself. If it is false, the judgment belongs to the speaker, not to you. Notice the clarity of this reasoning. Either the criticism contains truth, in which case it becomes useful guidance, or it contains falsehood, in which case it has no authority over your character. In neither case is emotional disturbance necessary. But most people do not pause long enough to make this distinction. The reaction arrives too quickly. Pride rises, fear appears. The mind rushes to defend its image before reason has had time to speak. And so authority slips away. The opinions of others begin shaping how a person sees themselves. A careless remark from someone who barely understands your life can linger in your mind longer than your own quiet knowledge of who you are. Think about how strange that is. Your understanding of yourself has been built through years of experience, effort, and reflection. Yet a brief sentence from someone who sees only a fragment of your life can suddenly shake that understanding, not because their opinion is powerful, but because it was accepted without examination. Marcus Aurelius confronted this very problem while ruling an empire filled with critics, rivals, and constant judgment. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, paragraph 52, he reminds himself that another person's opinion does not have the authority to disturb his mind unless he allows it to enter and take root. He treated every external judgment as something that must first pass through the gate of reason. Only there could it be examined. Only there could it be accepted or rejected. This image of a gate is powerful. Your mind is not an open field where every voice from the outside world should wander freely. It is more like a guarded city. Ideas arrive at the gate, but they must be inspected before they are allowed to enter. Most people leave the gate wide open. Every opinion walks in freely. Every criticism is allowed to sit at the center of their thoughts. Every misunderstanding is granted space to reshape their emotional state. And when the mind becomes this open to external voices, peace becomes impossible to protect, because there will never be a shortage of opinions in the world. Someone will always misunderstand you. Someone will always disapprove of a choice you made. Someone will always project their own fears or frustrations onto your actions. If each of those voices is given authority, your inner world will constantly shift depending on who spoke last. But the Stoic path offers another possibility. It teaches you to notice the moment when authority is being handed over, to pause before accepting a judgment as truth, to ask whether the voice speaking truly deserves influence over your mind. Once you learn to see that moment clearly, something important changes. You realize that control over your inner world has been closer than you thought, and that the peace you seek does not depend on silencing the voices around you. It depends on deciding which voices are allowed to remain. The first liberation: separating what belongs to you. Once you begin to notice the moment when someone else's opinion tries to enter your mind and shape your emotional state, another question naturally appears: what truly belongs to you? Most people have never examined this question with precision. They move through life carrying responsibilities that were never theirs to begin with. They feel responsible for how others interpret them, how others judge them, and even how others feel about them. This is where exhaustion begins. Imagine trying to control the weather. Each morning you wake up hoping the sky will behave according to your wishes. When it rains, you feel frustrated. When the wind blows in the wrong direction, you feel disappointed. Over time, your emotional stability becomes tied to something you were never meant to control. This is exactly what happens when a person attaches their peace to other people's opinions. The Stoics saw this confusion clearly and offered one of the most powerful distinctions in philosophy, a distinction that has the power to change the way you move through the world. Epictetus explained it simply in Enchiridion of Epictetus, paragraph 1. Some things are up to us and some things are not up to us. This sentence may appear obvious at first glance, yet most of the suffering people experience comes from ignoring it. What belongs to you? Your judgments, your intentions, your choices, your character, the effort you apply to your actions. What does not belong to you? Other people's opinions, other people's reactions, other people's interpretations of who you are. The reputation that travels through conversations you will never hear. When these two categories become mixed together, the mind becomes restless. A person begins trying to manage impressions in the minds of others. They adjust their words carefully, hoping to avoid criticism. They reshape their behavior, hoping to earn approval. They measure their worth through reactions they cannot fully see or control. But reputation is a moving shadow. It shifts from one person to another, from one conversation to the next. Even if you could please everyone in one moment, opinions would change again tomorrow. New interpretations would appear. New judgments would form. To anchor your peace in something so unstable is to build your house on water. Marcus Aurelius returned to this truth repeatedly in his private reflections. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 12, paragraph 4, he reminds himself that the opinion others hold about him belongs entirely to them. What belongs to him is the choice to act with justice, discipline, and clarity. Notice the direction of his attention, not outward, inward. Instead of spending energy trying to control the image others formed of him, he focused on whether his own actions aligned with reason and virtue. The outside world remained unpredictable, but his internal compass remained steady. This shift in attention creates the first real liberation. When you stop confusing what belongs to you with what belongs to others, the emotional weight you carry begins to lighten. A criticism may still appear. A misunderstanding may still occur. Someone may still form an opinion about you that feels unfair or incomplete, but the burden of managing those opinions disappears because they were never yours to manage. Your task becomes simpler and clearer: to examine your own actions honestly, to correct yourself when you fall short of your principles, to improve your character where improvement is needed. Beyond that, the interpretations formed in other minds are no longer your responsibility. This does not mean becoming indifferent to the well-being of others. Stoicism does not ask you to become cold or dismissive. It asks you to recognize the boundary between influence and control. You can act with integrity. You can speak with honesty. You can treat people with fairness. But the meaning others assign to your actions will always remain partly outside your reach. Once this boundary becomes clear, something remarkable happens. Your peace stops chasing approval. Instead, it begins to rest on something far more stable: your own conduct. And yet, even when people understand this distinction intellectually, many still struggle to live by it. The mind agrees with the principle, but the emotions continue to cling to approval and fear rejection. Which raises another important question. If the distinction between what we control and what we do not control is so clear, why does the mind resist letting go of external validation? Why the mind resists letting go? At this point, the reasoning seems clear. Some things belong to you and some things do not. Your character belongs to you. Your choices belong to you. Other people's opinions do not. Yet knowing this truth and living by it are two very different things. Many people understand the Stoic principle intellectually, but when criticism arrives, the old reaction still appears. The chest tightens. The mind begins defending itself. The need to explain, justify, or correct someone else's opinion quickly returns. Why does this happen? Why does the mind resist a principle that promises so much freedom? The answer lies deeper than logic. It lies in a very old human instinct: the desire to belong. Long before cities, careers, and social media existed, survival depended on acceptance within a group. To be rejected by one's tribe was not merely uncomfortable, it could be dangerous. Isolation meant vulnerability. Approval meant safety. Because of this, the human mind developed a powerful sensitivity to the opinions of others. Signs of approval created comfort. Signs of rejection created alarm. This instinct once helped our ancestors survive. But in the modern world, the same instinct often works against us. The mind still reacts to disapproval as if it were a threat to survival. A negative comment can trigger the same internal alertness that once warned humans of physical danger. The body tightens. Attention narrows. Emotion rises quickly. What we experience as anxiety about other people's opinions is often this ancient instinct operating in circumstances where it is no longer necessary. The Stoics understood that this instinct existed, but they also believed something else about human beings. They believed that reason could guide instinct. Seneca wrote extensively about the tendency of the mind to exaggerate threats and imagine dangers that do not truly exist. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, Letter 13, he observed that people suffer more from imagination than from reality. This insight applies directly to our fear of disapproval. When someone criticizes you, what is the real consequence? Words were spoken. An opinion was expressed. Nothing about your character has changed unless you choose to change it. Yet the mind reacts as if something essential has been taken away. What has actually been threatened is not your character. It is your image. And the image you believe others hold of you often becomes something the mind tries to protect at all costs. But there is a hidden problem in building your identity around this image. Images exist in the minds of other people. They are shaped by incomplete information, personal biases, fleeting emotions, and limited understanding of your life. No one sees your full story. No one knows the quiet intentions behind every decision you make. Yet when the mind becomes attached to protecting its image, It begins chasing control over something it can never fully reach. This is why the pursuit of universal approval leads to exhaustion. You adjust yourself for one audience, and another audience disagrees. You explain yourself to one critic, and another critic appears with a different interpretation. The mind runs from one opinion to the next, trying to repair a reputation that exists only in fragments across many different minds. The Stoic response to this problem is not indifference to others. It is clarity about identity. Your identity does not live in the opinions of strangers. Your identity lives in your character. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of this truth while carrying the enormous weight of leadership. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, paragraph 55, he writes that a person's worth is measured not by reputation, but by the quality of their actions and the principles they live by. This idea shifts the center of gravity in your life. Instead of asking whether others approve of you, you begin asking a different question. Did I act with integrity? Did I act with fairness? Did I act with discipline and clarity? When these questions become the standard by which you judge yourself, the opinions of others begin to lose their power. They may still appear, they may still sting for a moment, but they no longer define your direction, and yet there is still another step needed before this freedom becomes stable. Even when you understand that other people's opinions do not determine your worth, the mind can still react quickly when criticism appears. This is where a new discipline becomes necessary. Not the discipline of suppressing emotion, but the discipline of creating distance between what happens and how you respond. The discipline of emotional distance. Even after understanding that other people's opinions do not define your worth, the mind can still react quickly when criticism appears. This is natural. Impressions arrive suddenly. Words are heard, gestures are seen, and the mind moves to interpret them almost instantly. The Stoics did not expect human beings to stop receiving impressions. They understood that the first reaction often appears before reason has time to speak. What they trained themselves to control was what happened next. The crucial skill was distance. Not physical distance from people, but mental distance from the impression that has just arrived. Imagine someone speaks harshly to you. The words land in your ears, and immediately a surge of emotion begins to rise. Perhaps it is anger, embarrassment, or the urge to defend yourself. In that first moment, the mind feels pulled toward reaction. Most people follow that impulse without pause. The emotion becomes action, and the action often creates more disturbance. But the Stoics practiced a different response. They paused. That pause may last only a few seconds, yet it changes everything. Instead of allowing the impression to dictate their behavior, they created a small space in which reason could examine what had happened. Epictetus taught this discipline clearly in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 18. When an impression appears, he advised his students to say to themselves, "You are only an appearance and not the thing you claim to represent." This simple sentence creates separation. It reminds the mind that what it is experiencing in the moment is not necessarily the truth of the situation, but an interpretation that still needs to be examined. Consider how powerful this becomes in practice. Someone criticizes you. The impression appears, they are attacking me. The emotion begins to rise. But instead of accepting that interpretation immediately, you step back mentally and ask a question. Is this interpretation accurate? Perhaps the person is frustrated about something unrelated to you. Perhaps their criticism contains a useful observation that can help you improve. Perhaps it is an unfair judgment that says more about their mood than about your actions. Without distance, the mind never asks these questions. It reacts, and reaction often gives other people more power over your emotional state than they ever deserved. Distance restores clarity. It allows you to observe the situation rather than becoming consumed by it. The emotion may still appear, but it no longer commands immediate obedience. Marcus Aurelius described this practice in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, paragraph 3. He reminds himself that when something seems disturbing, the mind has the ability to withdraw from the impression, examine it calmly, and choose the response that reason approves. Notice the sequence he describes. First, the impression appears. Then the mind withdraws slightly. Then reason evaluates. Finally, a response is chosen. This sequence transforms emotional life. Instead of being pushed from one reaction to another, you begin responding with intention. A harsh comment arrives. You pause. You ask whether the criticism contains truth. If it does, you learn from it. If it does not, you allow it to pass without carrying it inside your mind. Someone ignores you. Instead of immediately assuming rejection, you consider other possibilities. Perhaps they are distracted. Perhaps they are dealing with their own difficulties. The story your mind was about to create loses its authority. This discipline does not make you passive. It makes you deliberate. It allows you to remain calm in situations where most people lose their balance. The words of others may still reach you, but they no longer enter your mind without examination. And once you begin practicing this mental distance, another realization slowly emerges. Many criticisms that once felt deeply personal begin to look different. You start noticing something that was always there but rarely recognized, that the judgments people express often reveal far more about their own inner world than about yours. When criticism reveals more about the speaker. Once you begin practicing emotional distance, something interesting starts to happen. Situations that once felt deeply personal begin to look different. Words that once seemed like direct attacks start revealing another layer that was previously hidden. You begin to notice that criticism often carries the fingerprint of the person delivering it. Most people speak not from pure observation, but from their own experiences, frustrations, expectations, and fears. Every judgment they express passes through the filter of their own mind before it reaches you. This means that what they say about you often reveals as much about them as it does about the situation itself. Consider how two different people can observe the same action and respond in completely different ways. One may see courage, where another sees arrogance. One may see independence, where another sees stubbornness. One may admire your confidence while another feels threatened by it. The action was the same. What changed was the lens through which it was interpreted. The Stoics were deeply aware of this tendency. Seneca wrote frequently about how easily people project their own emotional states onto others. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, letter 94, he explains that people often judge others according to the turbulence of their own character, rather than the facts of the situation. A person who is insecure may see competition everywhere. A person who is bitter may assume bad intentions even in neutral actions. A person who is frustrated with their own life may criticize those who pursue their own path. None of this necessarily reflects the truth about you. It reflects the condition of the mind interpreting you. When you understand this clearly, criticism begins to lose some of its emotional weight. Not because you dismiss every opinion, but because you recognize that opinions are shaped by incomplete perspectives. No one sees the full landscape of your life. People see fragments. They see brief moments of your behavior without the context of your intentions, struggles, or the decisions that led you there. From those fragments, they build conclusions that feel complete to them, but remain partial in reality. This realization does not require you to become defensive or dismissive. Instead, it encourages calm observation. When criticism appears, you can ask a simple question. Is this a clear reflection of my actions, or is it colored by the speaker's own emotions and experiences? Sometimes the criticism will contain truth. When that happens, it becomes valuable information that helps you refine your character. The Stoics believe that honest correction, even when uncomfortable, could be a powerful tool for self-improvement. But many criticisms will reveal something different. They will reveal impatience, insecurity, jealousy, misunderstanding, or frustration that belongs to the person speaking. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this dynamic while navigating the constant scrutiny of public life. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 11, paragraph 18, he reminds himself that when people act unfairly or speak harshly, they are often acting from ignorance about what is truly good. In other words, their judgment arises from a misunderstanding of life itself. Seeing this changes the emotional tone of criticism. Instead of reacting with anger or wounded pride, you begin to see these moments with a kind of quiet understanding. People act according to their beliefs, their experiences, and their current emotional state. Some are calm and thoughtful. Others are impatient and reactive, but none of them possess complete knowledge of who you are. This insight creates a subtle but powerful shift in your relationship with criticism. Instead of absorbing every judgment as if it were a final verdict, you begin evaluating it with curiosity. What part of this is useful? What part belongs to the speaker? Once this distinction becomes clear, the emotional pressure begins to ease. You no longer feel obligated to carry every opinion you hear. Some judgments can be accepted and learned from, others can be observed and released. And gradually you realize something else. Much of the tension surrounding other people's opinions comes from expecting them to behave differently than human beings naturally do, which leads to another Stoic realization that brings even deeper peace. True calm begins when you stop expecting people to be free from the very flaws that define human nature. Accepting the nature of human behavior. Once you begin to see that criticism often reflects the inner state of the person speaking, another realization quietly follows. Much of the frustration people feel toward others comes from expecting them to behave differently than they actually do. We expect people to be fair at all times. We expect them to understand our intentions without explanation. We expect them to judge us carefully, thoughtfully, and with complete knowledge of our situation. But these expectations rarely match reality. People misunderstand. People react emotionally. People speak before thinking. People judge quickly and sometimes unfairly. These patterns have existed for thousands of years and will continue long after our own time. The Stoics believed that peace begins not when the world changes, but when our expectations align with the world as it truly is. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of this every morning before facing the responsibilities of the day. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 1, he wrote that when you wake up, you should remind yourself that you will encounter people who are selfish, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, and impatient. This reflection was not meant to create cynicism, it was meant to create realism. If you walk into the day expecting every person to act with perfect wisdom and fairness, you will constantly feel disappointed. Every moment of impatience will seem like a personal offense. Every careless remark will feel like a violation of how people should behave. But if you begin the day understanding that human beings are imperfect, their behavior becomes easier to interpret calmly. A harsh word no longer surprises you. A misunderstanding no longer feels like a betrayal. A careless judgment no longer shakes your sense of stability. You recognize these moments as part of the human condition rather than personal attacks designed specifically against you. This shift removes a large portion of unnecessary suffering. Much of emotional pain does not come from what people do, but from the gap between what they do and what we expected them to do. When expectations become more realistic, that gap narrows. Epictetus used a simple example to illustrate this idea. If you are walking through a crowded market and someone bumps into you, you do not become outraged because you understand that crowded places naturally involve contact between people. But if the same thing happens in a quiet, empty room, it may surprise you. The event is the same. What changes is your expectation. The Stoic approach applies the same logic to human behavior. People will sometimes act impatiently, speak harshly, misunderstand your intentions, or form incomplete judgments about your life. When you expect perfection from imperfect beings, every flaw becomes a source of irritation. When you accept the reality of human nature, those same flaws lose their ability to disturb your peace. Acceptance does not mean approving of harmful behavior. It does not mean abandoning standards of fairness or integrity. The Stoics valued virtue deeply and encouraged people to act with justice and discipline. But they also recognize that you cannot demand wisdom from every person you encounter. Some people are still learning. Some are guided by emotion rather than reflection. Some act out of habits they have never examined. Understanding this allows you to remain steady even when others are not. Instead of reacting with surprise or resentment, you observe the situation clearly. You respond according to your own principles rather than being pulled into the emotional turbulence of someone else's behavior. And this brings an important shift in perspective. Your attention moves away from trying to control how others behave. It returns to something far more reliable, the standard by which you choose to live your own life, the quiet strength of inner standards. Once you stop expecting other people to behave perfectly, a new question begins to emerge. If the opinions, reactions, and judgments of others cannot provide a stable foundation for peace, what can? Many people spend years measuring themselves through the eyes of others. Approval becomes a signal that they are doing well. Disapproval becomes a sign that something is wrong. Their direction changes depending on who is watching, who is speaking, and who is judging. But a life guided by external reactions can never remain steady. Opinions change constantly. What one person praises, another criticizes. What one group admires today, another may reject tomorrow. When identity depends on approval, the mind becomes like a compass surrounded by magnets, constantly pulled in different directions. The Stoics believed that a stable life requires a different center, not the shifting opinions of the crowd, an internal standard. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea again and again while reflecting on the responsibilities of leadership. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 3, paragraph 12, he reminds himself that the only true measure of a person is whether their actions are guided by reason, justice, and discipline. Notice the difference in orientation. Instead of asking whether others approve of your choices, the Stoic asks whether those choices align with virtue. Did I act with honesty? Did I treat others fairly? Did I allow emotion to overpower my judgment? Or did I remain guided by reason? These questions create an internal compass that does not depend on applause or criticism. When you begin living by inner standards rather than external approval, something remarkable happens. Your decisions become clearer. Instead of adjusting yourself to satisfy every opinion around you, you measure your actions against principles that remain stable over time. Integrity replaces popularity as the measure of success. This does not mean ignoring feedback or refusing to learn from others. Wisdom requires listening carefully and examining useful criticism. But the final judgment about your conduct no longer belongs to the crowd. It belongs to your own reasoned conscience. Seneca described this inner orientation in Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, letter 43. He advises his reader to live as if a wise and honorable person were always observing their actions, not in order to impress others, but to remain faithful to one's own principles. The goal is not public approval. The goal is consistency between what you believe and how you act. When this consistency becomes your priority, the emotional influence of other people's opinions begins to fade. A criticism may still reach you, but it no longer shakes your identity. Instead, it becomes something to evaluate calmly. Does this criticism reveal a real mistake that I can correct? If the answer is yes, improvement becomes possible. If the answer is no, the opinion can pass through your mind without leaving a mark. Because your standard was never built on their judgment. It was built on your character. This internal foundation creates a quiet form of strength that does not need to announce itself. It does not depend on being admired or defended. It exists simply in the discipline of living according to principles that remain steady even when circumstances change. And when a person develops this kind of inner alignment, another transformation slowly appears. The words and actions of others lose their ability to provoke emotional reactions so easily. The mind becomes harder to disturb, not because it has become cold, but because it has become anchored. Becoming unreachable to emotional provocation. When your life begins to follow inner standards rather than external approval, something subtle starts to change inside you. Situations that once triggered immediate reactions begin to lose their intensity. The same criticism that once unsettled your thoughts now passes through your mind with far less disturbance. This is the beginning of a quiet transformation. You start becoming difficult to provoke. Most people move through life with emotional buttons that others can easily press. A certain tone of voice triggers anger. A dismissive look awakens insecurity. A careless remark creates the urge to defend oneself immediately. These reactions are common, yet they reveal something important. When another person can easily trigger your emotional state, they hold influence over your inner world. The Stoics trained themselves to reduce this influence, not by suppressing emotion completely, but by weakening the automatic connection between what others do and how they feel. Epictetus explained this discipline clearly. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 25, he reminds his students that if someone insults you and you become angry, it is not the insult that defeated you, but your own reaction to it. The victory of the insult lies in your response. This insight forces a difficult but liberating form of honesty. Each emotional reaction becomes a signal, revealing where the mind still seeks validation or protection. If a person's praise fills you with excitement, you may still be depending on approval. If their criticism fills you with anger, you may still be protecting an image of yourself that feels fragile. Recognizing these patterns is not a reason for shame. It is an opportunity for training. The Stoics viewed emotional disturbances the way an athlete views physical weakness, not as a permanent flaw, but as something that can be strengthened through practice. When someone speaks harshly, you observe the impulse to react. Instead of obeying it immediately, you pause. You remind yourself that the words themselves cannot damage your character. When someone misunderstands your intentions, you resist the urge to prove yourself instantly. You ask whether clarification is useful or whether silence preserves your peace. Gradually, the mind learns a new pattern. Events occur, impressions appear, but reaction is no longer automatic. Marcus Aurelius described this state as a form of inner resilience. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 48, he reminds himself that the mind can remain calm and self-governed even when surrounded by difficult people and circumstances. The disturbance does not enter unless the mind opens the door. This does not mean becoming indifferent to everything around you. The Stoic does not lose the ability to care. Instead, they choose carefully what deserves emotional investment. A person's character deserves attention. A person's intentions deserve examination. But every passing remark, every careless opinion, every moment of irritation from others does not deserve space inside the mind. Once this discipline develops, something remarkable becomes visible to others. Your calm. People who expect to provoke anger or insecurity sometimes find themselves facing silence and composure instead. The reaction they expected never appears. Not because you are pretending to be calm, because your peace is no longer easily negotiable. And when a person reaches this point, a strange paradox begins to unfold. The less they depend on the opinions of others, the more grounded and confident they appear. The paradox of freedom. From opinion. When a person stops depending on the approval of others, something unexpected begins to happen. At first, the change is internal. The mind becomes quieter. Decisions become clearer. The constant tension of trying to manage how everyone perceives you slowly fades. But over time, this internal shift starts to appear on the outside. People notice a certain calm in the way you move through situations that once would have created pressure. Conversations that used to make you defensive now feel easier. Criticism no longer pushes you into long explanations or attempts to justify every action. You begin to speak more simply. You begin to act more directly. This creates a paradox that the Stoics understood well. The moment you stop chasing approval is often the moment you begin to earn respect. Most people can sense when someone is trying too hard to be accepted. They see the hesitation before a person speaks. They notice the constant adjustments made to avoid disagreement. They feel the underlying need for validation that quietly shapes the conversation. And when someone lives this way, their presence becomes uncertain. Not because they lack intelligence or ability, but because their direction changes depending on who is watching. But a person who is guided by internal principles moves differently. Their actions are not calculated to satisfy every opinion. They choose their words carefully, yet they do not distort them to please everyone in the room. This steadiness creates a kind of quiet authority. Seneca wrote about this effect when describing the character of a wise person. In Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, Letter 71, he explains that the person who lives according to reason does not shape their life around praise or blame. Their satisfaction comes from acting in accordance with virtue. Because of this, their behavior remains consistent even when the reactions around them change. One person may admire them, another may criticize them, yet their course remains steady. This steadiness is what people begin to recognize as confidence. But it is not the loud confidence that demands attention or seeks admiration. It is the quieter form of confidence that grows from self-trust. A trust built through repeated decisions to act according to one's principles rather than according to the expectations of others. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this idea while leading an empire filled with competing interests and constant public judgment. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 10, paragraph 16, he reminds himself that the opinions of others are fleeting and unreliable, while the commitment to act with justice and reason remains within his control. When this understanding becomes part of daily life, a person's energy shifts. Instead of spending time analyzing how they were perceived in every conversation, they focus on whether their actions were honorable. Instead of replaying criticism in their thoughts, they ask whether the criticism contains truth that can help them improve. Instead of seeking admiration, they concentrate on maintaining integrity. And strangely, this independence often attracts more respect than the pursuit of approval ever could, because people sense when someone is no longer negotiating their character. Yet even this respect must be treated carefully. The Stoic does not replace the desire for approval with the desire for admiration. Both forms of dependence place your peace in the hands of others. The deeper goal remains the same: to live in such a way that the stability of your mind no longer depends on the voices around you, which leads to the final and most powerful idea the Stoics offered: the realization that true peace is not built by controlling circumstances or managing opinions. It is built by constructing something within the mind that cannot easily be shaken, the sovereignty of the inner citadel. There comes a moment in this journey when a person begins to understand something profound. Peace was never meant to be negotiated with the world. For most of their lives, people try to secure calm by arranging circumstances in their favor. They hope for understanding from others, fairness in every interaction, respect from those around them, and recognition for their efforts. When these conditions appear, they feel stable. When they disappear, the mind becomes restless again. But this strategy places peace on unstable ground. Circumstances change constantly. People misunderstand. Opinions shift. Situations develop in ways no one can fully predict. If your inner stability depends on the behavior of others or the arrangement of events, it will always remain fragile. The Stoics offered another vision of strength. They described the mind as capable of becoming a kind of inner fortress, a place where reason governs and where external disturbances cannot easily penetrate. Marcus Aurelius referred to this idea often while writing his private reflections. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 48, he reminds himself that the mind has the power to retreat within itself and remain calm, even when surrounded by confusion and conflict. He described this inner stability as something that must be constructed deliberately, not through isolation from the world, but through disciplined thinking within it. Each time you examine your reactions instead of obeying them, the walls of this inner citadel grow stronger. Each time you refuse to allow another person's opinion to dictate your emotional state, its foundation becomes more stable. Each time you choose integrity over approval, reason over impulse, and clarity over anxiety, you reinforce the structure that protects your peace. Over time, this practice creates a new relationship with the outside world. Events still occur. Criticism still appears. People still behave unpredictably. None of these things disappear from life. What changes is their ability to disturb you, because your center of stability has moved. It no longer rests in reputation, praise, or the reactions of others. It rests in the quiet knowledge that your actions are guided by principles you have chosen carefully. Epictetus expressed this independence clearly in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 4, Chapter 1. He taught that the truly free person is not the one who avoids criticism or hardship, but the one whose inner state cannot be controlled by external forces. Freedom in this sense is not about escaping the world. It is about governing yourself within it. When the mind reaches this level of discipline, something remarkable happens. Situations that once created anxiety begin to feel manageable. conversations that once required careful self-protection begin to feel simpler. You no longer enter every interaction wondering how you will be judged. You enter knowing that your responsibility is only to act with reason and character. The rest belongs to the world. And the world has always been unpredictable, but your will does not have to be. The Stoics believe that this is the highest form of personal sovereignty, a life where the most important territory you govern is not outside you, but within. A place where calm is not borrowed from favorable circumstances. It is built from discipline, clarity, and acceptance. And once this inner citadel becomes strong enough, you discover something that many people search for their entire lives. Your peace no longer depends on the behavior of others. It depends on the strength of your own mind. Peace that depends only on your will. At this point, something essential should be clear. The peace you were searching for was never hidden in the behavior of other people. It was never waiting for the day when criticism disappears, when everyone understands your intentions, or when every opinion about you becomes fair and accurate. That day will never come. Human beings will continue to misunderstand each other. Some will judge quickly, others will speak without reflection. Many will carry their own frustrations into conversations that have little to do with you. This has always been part of life. The Stoics did not waste their energy trying to correct the entire world. They understood that attempting to control every opinion and every reaction would trap a person in endless struggle. Instead, they asked a far more powerful question. If the world cannot be controlled, what can? The answer returns to the place where this entire journey began. Your mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote a sentence that captures this truth with remarkable clarity in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 12, paragraph 36. He reminds himself that the mind becomes whatever it repeatedly allows itself to dwell upon. If the mind constantly returns to the judgments of others, it becomes restless. If it constantly chases approval, it becomes dependent. But if it returns again and again to reason, discipline, and self-command, it becomes steady. This is where real freedom begins. Not in controlling what others say, not in avoiding criticism, but in refusing to allow external voices to decide the condition of your inner world. The Stoic does not ignore people out of arrogance. He ignores what does not deserve authority. He listens when wisdom appears. He learns when correction is justified, but he refuses to surrender his peace to every passing opinion. Epictetus reminded his students that the greatest victory a person can achieve is mastery over their own responses. In Enchiridion of Epictetus, paragraph 1, he explained that once a person clearly separates what belongs to them from what does not, they become difficult to disturb. The outside world continues moving. Voices continue speaking. Opinions continue forming. But the mind no longer runs after them. Instead, it returns to its own center. Your task then is simple, though not always easy. Guard your thoughts. Examine the impressions that arrive in your mind before accepting them as truth. Act according to the principles you know to be right, even when approval does not follow. And remember that no opinion, no insult, and no misunderstanding has the power to damage your character unless you allow it to guide your actions. Seneca expressed this idea when he wrote that the greatest peace comes to those who rely on their own judgment rather than the noise of the crowd. When your direction is guided by reason rather than by applause or criticism, your life becomes quieter and stronger at the same time. This is the promise the Stoics offered. Not a world without judgment, not a life free from criticism, but something far more valuable, a mind that cannot easily be shaken. A life where your peace is not negotiated with circumstances, not borrowed from approval, and not dependent on the unpredictable thoughts of others. It rests in one place only, your will.